All right then.
So why don't you tell everyone sort of the overall topic, and then give kind of a quick recap of the stuff you covered before, and then take it right from there. And I'll interject with all my objections and to call you an Islamophobe.
Brilliant. Yeah, do feel free to push back where you feel we should push back, or to debate points or raise other ideas, or whatever you want to say, really. So basically, I'm talking about what shape the church needs to be in to resist and reverse Islamization. What shape does the church have to be in to cope with the ummah and to cope with the project of Islamization? You know, and in part one that you can find on David's channel, you can find it on my channel. I talked about the first thing that we need to do is to reject liberal secular humanism, and that means to restructure the way that we frame ourselves in the world, away from the nation state and to within the church. And that we needed to cultivate a more fully Christian identity as part of that, and what that full Christian identity actually meant for us. And that from developing that Christian identity, an essential part of it would require for churches to work together in ecumenical sort of networks about what they're against, and to develop a Christian politique that's rooted from the Christian identity, that's focused on the persecuted church, that essentially strives towards a new Christendom. And that part of the problem that we face is that we've got a lot of cowardice in the church. And that cowardice in the church needs to be challenged. And one of the ways to challenge that is to recover this love of martyrdom, to recover the cult of martyrdom, as it were. And then also
Hey, one second on that. 1 second on that.
Yeah.
Recapturing love of martyrdom, because you're talking about courage, and that's what I've been thinking for a long time. Like, you guys have there's one obstacle. It's just not being scared. I mean, what do? They call you names. They call you Islamophobes, and everyone backs down. Everyone's terrified of being called names and so on. And they'll actually like paralyze the population of an entire country. I mean, especially like in the UK. I mean, with the grooming gangs and so on, it was just, we don't want to be called Islamophobes. And you have like judges and social workers and police, and they're all so scared of being labeled a racist that they will let this keep on for tens of thousands of young girls. And they're so terrified of being called a name. I'm sitting there looking at it going, the only thing that's keeping this going is you're scared. If you just weren't scared, if you weren't scared of being called a name, you'd win. You just win just by taking away your fear. So when you were saying love of martyrdom, I was thinking like, not even necessarily to the point of being killed or something, but just get it through your head that if you're standing up for what's right, they might come after your reputation. They might come after your job. They might toss you in jail for saying the wrong things, especially in the UK. But get it through your head that that's okay, that it's okay to suffer these consequences for doing the right thing. And then it would just change everyone's attitude. Hey, I'm going to say the right thing. I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it on social media. I'm going to do this. And okay, if you're going to lock me up for 3 years for doing that, I'm okay with it. I'm okay. I don't want that, but I'm okay with it. And I'm no longer scared. If you had enough people who are just, I'm not scared of what you can do to me anymore, I think that's it. That's all. That's kind of like the missing thing. Just get rid of the fear, be willing to accept the consequences, and they lose their power over you, because that's their power right now. We've got an entire population that's terrified of being called names or terrified of consequences. And this is how we control them. And okay, that's destroying you. That's destroying your entire country. And so what do you need? You need courage. You need courage and a willingness to accept consequences, and they lose their power. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to point out like the martyrdom. Yeah, the martyrdom. It's just, everyone watching, it's not, most of you are not going to be killed for anything that you would say or do or something like that, but you should be willing to face the consequences. And if you could, totally different world, totally different world. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
And I think that and just so you know, I'm using the guest chat between me and you just to make notes for my own reference. So don't feel you have to respond to those guest messages. But the one of the issues that we face is that the church is very middle class in the UK. And it is a very comfortable middle class. It's the boomer generation. The boomer generation dominate the church hierarchs and the church hierarchy, and they just come from a generation that was all about their own comfort and was all about their own happiness, and that they don't have a worldview. Partly because they've not been formed in the faith correctly. They just don't have a worldview that says carry your cross. They don't have a worldview that says suffer for Jesus. What they have a worldview of is let's all be nice. We should all be kind. And their vision of the church is just to be kind, and it's all about personal success. And so you've got a very limp-wristed kind of ecclesiology that comes from a generation of people born after the war, when it was all about glamour, when it was all about maximizing your own experiences and wealth, because they'd grown up in the deprivations of the back end of World War II, certainly in the UK. But the boomer generation in America was also just born out at the end of the war, and it was all that was when the West was at its peak. At the back end of its peak after the war. And so it was very much about comfort. And it wasn't until Vietnam that was sort of challenged in America. But the middle classdom of the church is part of why there's no love of the cross. There's no love of suffering for the kingdom. There's no love of martyrdom, because if you are not frightened to die for Jesus, then what else do you have to fear? Once you lose that fear, everything else is inconsequential. And that's something that we desperately need. So to press on.
One second. Little side note here. Does Bob still have a YouTube channel? I know you do, and I know you appear on various. So what do you want me to actually put in the description box for anyone who wants to click?
Yes, so my channel is Bob of Speaker's Corner.
Okay.
It is not Soko Films. It is not Revelations 22. I'm not funded through these channels. I'm not supported through these channels. I'm only supported. My only channel is Bob of Speaker's Corner. But there's a man that's got courage, a lot of courage. So another thing that we need to cultivate, I mentioned in part one, is that we need to cultivate this warrior code of chivalry, that the church needs to throw off this erroneous doctrine of pacifism. The place where the church should be is a place where everybody goes, Christians don't start trouble, but you don't want to start trouble with Christians. And if we can reach that place in culture where people say that about us, then we've reached the right place. Of a community that stands up for itself, and everybody knows that it stands up for itself, but at the same time is not a community that bullies others, and that is essentially chivalry. It's being gentle to the weak, and it's being strong in the defense of the weak and strong to the bully, and bullying the bully, and that kind of mentality.
Hey, did we talk about Plato's Republic last time?
We did. We did talk about Plato's Republic. You mentioned how Plato mentions this.
Yeah. I'll just recap that real quick for everyone. So, and I've mentioned that several times in live streams. But yeah, they get to a point where they're trying to formulate like the ideal city and so on. They get to their military, their soldiers. They want the most fearsome, feared soldiers on the planet, men who are raised from the time they're born. And they're like selected, like the people who are just like born aggressive and so on. They pick these guys and they craft them for their entire lives into becoming the ultimate soldiers. And then they start wondering, wait a minute, if we've created an army of the most fierce, aggressive, soldiers on the planet, what is to stop them from just taking over and running the city themselves? And they said, no, we need these guys to be extremely loving and caring and protective over their own people. So we want them extremely hyper aggressive and violent towards enemies, but like super gentle and protective over their own people. Can these two natures go together? And they're ready to derail the entire discussion and just give up. And then it gets mentioned. Wait a minute, those natures can go together, and we see it in the dog. You see it in dogs. You can have a dog that will. You can have a dog that will go right for the face of any intruder, but yet you can trust the dog with your baby. So they realize that it's possible, and they decide to raise up their fighters like that.
Yeah, and that's what we need. We need to take these very gentle men that we have in the church and turn them into the kind of men that can stick up for themselves, and stick up for their community. And then we also talked about the idea of living out your faith as a culture, living out fully, living out bombastically, living it out in such a way as that it takes up space, it absorbs time, it absorbs energy, it creates waves in the cultural matrix of a multicultural society, um, you know, and and that's kind of where we got up to, because there was a lot of what are these things where people pay you to read their comments, because I don't use them. What do you call them? I never
Super
have them.
chats, super chats.
Super chats. We had these super chats, and then obviously AP just every 2 minutes had something new to say about orthodoxy. I've got to mention orthodoxy.
Yeah, I
Got to
gotta
mention
mention it. Gotta
orthodoxy.
can't
Got
gotta
to
talk
mention
about it.
orthodoxy.
Hey, what
Did I
about
mention
orthodoxy?
orthodoxy?
Hey,
What was that about orthodoxy?
you know, in my church, the Orthodox Church. Yeah.
Yeah, we love the Orthodox Church, by the way. Just saying, but AP just anyway. So that's kind of where we got up to. So I'm going to kind of pick up from area, pick up from part two. Now, I only skimmed through part one in preparation for this because I didn't have time to go through the full 2 hours and 20 minutes. And so if I repeat a point, I just ask people's indulgence. If I recover a point that I've already spoke about, I ask for your indulgence. But I promise you, we will be bringing up new points. So I've touched upon it. My next point is the problem of the boomers. It is the problem of the boomer culture. The boomers were a generation of Christians who singularly failed. I mean, there was a lot of poor generations that failed from 1830s onwards right through to the present. But the boomer generation failed spectacularly to achieve anything for Christ. And whilst there were saints in the boomer generation, whilst there were exceptional Christians in the boomer generation, on the whole, they are the generation that drove the church over the cliff, along with the rest of society. They went with it. They just went along with society, and their culture in which they were raised was marked by glamour, was marked by a desire for comfort, and you see this after wars, after World War One, you had a rising glamour and distraction. You see it again after World War Two, and obviously this was a generation that in terms of the church, because obviously there were hard people, running and defending the nation state and fighting the Cold War, but in terms of the church, it was a generation that just didn't seem to have any sense of vision, had fully accepted, incorporated this idea that all the church should be is a charity, that all the church should be is maybe a prophetic voice that tries to be a conscience to society, but otherwise doesn't see the church as having a bigger role. And that's really poor ecclesiology. It's a really poor understanding of what the church is. Going back to identity, which I mentioned in part one, if we are priests, our role is to sanctify and to offer up everything in the whole of creation unto God. So to take dominion over everything and to offer everything up to God through our role as priests by the discipling of the nations. And and so we've got to. I mean, and the boomer generation is filing out. The Lord is taking them to glory, and newer people are rising up. But the result is that for the moment we're a bit clogged up with boomers and their very narrow, very poor understanding of ecclesiology. And the quicker we break through their grip over the church and that very narrow understanding of ecclesiology, and you're still there because everything's frozen.
Yep.
So the problem with the sort of middle classdom of the church is it doesn't have the culture of sacrifice. It doesn't want to make a sacrifice. It wants a comfortable life. And because it wants a comfortable life, it's not willing to do the things that are necessary to do to resist Islamization. And that comes from the boomer generation. They are integrated, they are well adapted citizens, they have benefited from society. They think society is working, and they don't think that there is any problem to be tackled or to be challenged.
Yo, do you guys have prosperity theology over there?
We do, but not in any big way. It's here, but it's not huge.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because yeah, so I became a Christian in jail, and then I started like in prison. I started just like there are all these ministries that send out free Bible studies and stuff. So I was just signing up for every free Bible study I could. But keep in mind, I didn't know anything about Christianity, so I was like almost a blank slate. So I have zero discernment and so on. And so I just start doing all these different Bible studies from all these different groups, and it was the same thing every time. It would be like I'd be reading something, and I'd be like, I read that verse. That's not what that meant. And so I was reading the prosperity, some of the prosperity stuff. It was Kenneth Copeland Ministries was sending stuff, and I was reading the book they sent me, and it was talking about the parable of the sower, and it was saying how this is about sowing your money to reap the harvest, a hundredfold harvest, and stuff like that. And I was going, I mean, I only read that a couple times, but what? Didn't Jesus himself explain what that one is about? Didn't he say it was about the word? Let me go check that.
Yeah,
And I go back and I was like,
it's
wait, he explained what that was. You guys are saying that, oh, I don't like this stuff. This stuff, you're trying to turn everything into something about money. But when I was reading that stuff back then about how God's just going to make you prosper financially and all this stuff if you're actually faithful to him, if you're not prospering financially and in all these other ways and with a big house and stuff, it's because you just don't have the right faith and stuff. And I'm just thinking, you guys are like setting up a disaster here. You're making it so that
But
people are not going to be able to endure anything that happens if things go bad, and they're going
yeah,
to think they're being punished because they're bad.
and there's a softer version of that across the West, which is this idea that we can just pray every problem away. So it always gets me in trouble when I say this, but prayer is not the solution. It is not going to fix everything. But that's embedded in middle class culture. It's kind of like we whatever the problem is, we can just pray about it. And so there is that middle classdom to the churches that we have to break through. We have to break the grip of the boomers on the church hierarchy, because the boomers are holding the church back, because they are so enmeshed, so embedded, so dependent upon a kind of boxed in Christianity that they can't imagine a Christianity that's more robust, more forceful, more energetic, more diverse. They just want bums on pews, pay your tithe, receive your sacraments, go away, rinse and repeat week after week. And a church that doesn't fit that description is a church that doesn't fit with them. And so that is part of the challenge of what it is to respond to Islam, is to get rid of the things clogging up, or bypass the things that are clogging up the church's response. And the boomer generation and middle class Christianity is part of what is clogging up the arteries of the church in terms of responding to the challenges that it faces.
Let me just go ahead and say it as the Joker from the 1988 Batman would say it. Sounds like you're saying the church needs an enema here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking about you boomers. We're saying you boomers and your crap ideas need to...
have failed. They've failed. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's lots of godly people amongst the boomers insofar as they were taught how to be godly. And there's lots of saints amongst the boomers, I have no doubt, and good Christians amongst the boomers, you know. But as a generation, apart from a few, they have largely failed as a generation. And we need to recognize that as the generations that we're picking up their mess, and that's where we're dealing. So it's about recognizing where we are in history.
Just a little side note, because I'm guessing a lot of the things that affected Christians actually played a role among non-Christians, or getting people to even leave Christianity, because I did a live stream either earlier this year or at the end of the last year with someone in the UK who did a poll, and you could have asked anyone. I don't know if you guys would have thought about this differently, but you could have asked anyone over here, like, hey, if we do a poll of religious beliefs and so on by different age groups, what's it going to show? And like any one of us would have said, oh, the oldest generation, they would be like the most Christian. And then as you get younger, they would become progressively more atheistic. We would have all said that. And yet the study showed the exact reverse. It was the oldest generation. It was the oldest two generations, the 45 to 54s, the 55 to 64s, and so on, that were the most atheistic. And the youngest generation, the 18 to 24, they were the least atheistic and the most open to hearing someone share what they believe about their religion and so on. And so I'm guessing if that's connected, if that whole boomer thing was just a big disaster all around.